created a lot of information this last class, and then this Q&A is for anything you can possibly think of that's happened during the class or any other things that you might have questions about. So feel free to hit me with whatever you'd like at this point.
Well, I have
So
a question.
yeah.
How long did you do it for friends and family before you was there a place where you got comfortable enough to where you felt like you could start charging? Or, I mean, how did that all happen? Did you work with another medium s- to feel more like you were ready? I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking, but do you know what I'm saying? Do you understand kind of what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting
Okay,
down.
you're connecting with.
So I was kind of shoved into the situation, to
Okay.
be honest. I had a neighbor that was, um, I was, how do I put this? I spent probably 5 days a week at the church at that point. And I had a neighbor that was right next door to me that was into crystals and tie dye and all these things. And so I used to call her my fluffy neighbor. I loved it. That's where fluffy came from. And I went over to her house one day and she was like, we were just talking about things. And I was telling her how I thought my house was haunted. And she's like, so you pick up on those things? And I'm like, yeah, I've always been kind of weird like that. And she's like, no, that's great. And she's like, hey, I want you to try something. And she handed me a deck of tarot cards. And I had, I mean, I come from a family of gifted people. So, I mean, it's not like some of these things were foreign concepts to me, but I was trying to be as quote unquote normal as I could be because I just wasn't interested in it. And so she handed me a deck of cards and said, see what you can do. And I'm like, I don't know how to read cards. She's like, just see what you can do. And I'm like, okay. And so I just shuffled the deck and I started putting cards out. And she's like, well, what are you picking up on? And so I started telling her what that was. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly right. Blah, 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 blah. And so I was like, really? you know? And then I kind of went down my own little rabbit hole with it. I talked to every pastor known to mankind. And I ended up I got referred to a medium in Anchorage, Alaska. And I went to her and she's like, whoa, you're psychic. And I'm like, and she didn't know anything about me. And then she started telling me things about my grandparents and things along those lines. And I was like, so this is legit for you too. And then she started telling me things that I had experienced in my own home. And I was like, that's right. That's crazy. So I was like, okay, so it made me more comfortable knowing that somebody else was real so that I could be comfortable with my own messages that I was sharing with people. Still shied away from it for a long time, but I did start kind of dabbling a little bit, going to, sessions with people that were doing group readings and stuff like that. And then I moved to Idaho and I had to re-meet all the friends because I didn't have any friends here. And lo and behold, it turned out I had a couple nights with friends where I was in my early 20s, so I had a little bit too much wine to drink and started getting really honest with them. I was like, they would say something, and of course, doing what I do, I would see things around them, and it was like, and wine makes me honest. So I was like, let me tell you something. And I would tell them, and then it made sense to them. So that's kind of how that spiraled. And then, like I was saying, these newer friends of mine would come to me and they're like, how'd you know this? How'd you know this? And I was like, well, I just did, and that would be when I was sober again. And we talk about it and they're like, you should do this. And I'm like, nah. And then finally, more and more of those friends started bringing their friends over
Mhm.
and they would show up with a bottle of wine. I was like, I'm starting to think I'm getting a reputation. And so it was kind of funny. And we'd all just sit down and hang out. And like I said, I was in my early 20s, so it is what it was. But um, and I just share things with them, and all of these things were making sense. And so then they told friends and they told friends. So I'd say it probably took me about, I don't even think a whole year of doing readings for friends and family. And family is very difficult to read for because remember we talked about that like emotional attachment. If you're too emotionally connected to somebody, it skews your messages because you're like, am I actually getting this or do I already know this? So family is a little more tricky to read for unless it's a situation that you didn't know was going on, in which case it's more comfortable to read for. The less you know about something, the easier it is to read. But back to the topic, yeah. So I had too many people showing up at my house, and I wasn't comfortable with it. So I ended up opening a little business downtown in Coeur d'Alene called Celtic Moon, and that was a long time ago. I think it was 2004 or something like that, and that's when I set it because I actually set up an office space, and that's when I started charging. But when I no, I take that back. I did charge before that because too many people were showing up at my house.
Hmm.
And you have to remember this was 2003-ish, 2002, 2003. I started off charging $60 and I thought I was charging $1 million when I did this. And but somebody else had recommended that that's what I did. And at that point I was more entangled into the holistic side of the community. I was starting to go to like little group meetings, and I did a show. I did one of the big, back when they had the big, huge Body, Mind, Spirit festivals over in Spokane. And I had done that. And like I said, it just trickle affected to where I ended up going from $60 to $90. And then from $90, and $60 was only like for half an hour, and then I started expanding to an hour and 45 minutes an hour. And then it went from $90 to 120 to, so on and so forth, and to where I'm at today.
Okay.
So, but it took a long time.
I get it. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
drink, do like marijuana or anything when I'm around people because of
Yes.
that.
Just to get very honest.
Oh, yes.
That's also why I
I'm
tell
very
people
sorry
not
for
to
them.
do that. Don't do drugs or alcohol if you're going to do a reading, because it also skews your ability to communicate the messages properly.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah, it relaxes you. It relaxes the heck out of you, but it doesn't do good things for reading. So,
So
uh,
funny. That's
yeah.
so
So, Vanessa, what's
yeah,
your question?
that explains it. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Vanessa.
Um, yes. Is there like a certain time frame or something before like a spirit can make itself present after passing?
So, yes and no. How's that for an exact answer? um, so a spirit can show, a lot of times I've seen spirits show up like right after passings, obviously during and then right after passings, or like within a very short time period, they will show up. But it's usually a little blip here and a blip there. If you're going to do a reading for someone, I will, because of that whole ethical thing that I've talked about a million times, I will actually tell people to wait as long as they can, like upwards of 3 months, if they can wait that long, to have a reading, because it gives that person that has passed time to process on the other side. And it gives them time to really figure out how the whole system works. But if you're going to do a reading for someone, sometimes you can't control when someone's going to come through. You remember those spontaneous readings we talked about in class today? That will happen sometimes, but you have to be extremely cautious how you deliver messages to someone if it's a spontaneous reading and someone just passed. You really, really, in fact, I will actually ask like little sly kind of pointed questions to somebody to see if they're in a position of being comfortable with that. Now, that being said, just everybody that I know also knows what I do. So they know if they lost someone, I'm usually the first person that they call. And they're like, have you seen him? So it's, you'll be confronted with that situation. It is, as long as people know what you're doing, sometimes they will just come out and ask you, in which case that goes from a spontaneous reading to what we kind of discuss is more of a scheduled, because they had a pointed intention for asking you. Okay. But yeah, generally speaking, if you're going to do a reading for someone, I'd say tell them to wait 2 or 3 months so that way they have time, the spirit has time to process. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, next question. Cami, do you have any questions?
Not that I can think of offhand.
Okay. Well, I figured because of, what you do, that maybe you would have some, situational questions.
Um, the only thing that maybe it came to mind was not so much for me, but maybe for others, is that kind of coming out process of letting people know what you do, and kind of some of the blowback or the responses or the loss of friends or family that can happen with that.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Mhm.
Even my own family was, and I have a weird family. And even they were like, right, sure, you do what? So it's, that when you are, we call it coming out of the psychic closet, because it is emotionally as similar as you can get to somebody coming out of the closet for other reasons. It's sharing a life altering, dynamic of your life that is shifting with people who know you as one person. And now you're saying, I'm this person, but I also have this. So the best way that I can describe sharing it with someone, because I didn't tell people for a long time, I let people figure it out. So there's always the shy and reserved approach where you can let people just kind of figure out what you're doing, or there's the, when you become comfortable with it. You need to be comfortable in your own skin to be able to share those things. Because, fortunately for us in the period that we live in, this is a much more accepted situation now. When I theoretically came out of the psychic closet, it really wasn't. It was not accepted. I was the weird one. I was the one that was, oh, you talk to dead people. Sure you do. And so it was having to back it up with a lot of proof. Having to, now at this point, is 20 plus years later, people know what I do, but it took a long time. And so you do have to have the confidence and the self-faith that I talk about a lot through the class. You really have to have that self-faith, and you need to have yourself established on the inside and your heart established to be comfortable with, like you were saying, like those blowbacks, because you're going to be doing a lot of explaining. And you have to do, your friends may look at you like, some of them will think you're the coolest person on the planet now that you can do this. You're still probably going to have to do some proof. People love evidence, right? But when you're dealing with people that aren't comfortable with these things, or maybe have their own religious perspective on this is wrong, then you may have some blowback. You may lose some friends. You also, what do they say? When God closes a door, he opens a window. So where you may lose some friends and they fall off of the friend bandwagon, you may also make a lot of fantastic, more ascended friends. So your friend group may change. Your family, if they're good family, they will come to terms with things. It's and there's an acceptance thing. And then sometimes, my own husband, when I was dating him, I had to explain to him, I'm like, so those shows on TV with the ghosts, what do you think of those? Makes dating really interesting. And so he was like, oh, I think those are cool. I'm like, so you like them? You like the shows? Let me tell you something. And so then I shared him, like, so I see dead people. And obviously I went into a much more gentle approach to that. But there was a look of like, he literally looked at me, he goes, but you're so normal. And I'm like, well, I am normal. I just happen to be normal with a side of psychic gifts. It's a package deal, normal Jen, cupcakes, and psychic abilities. I used to have a cupcake shop. So those are the things, I found a lot of times that when you're going through this process, it does teach you how to really have a lot of empathy for people too. Because people that don't understand, they're just not meant to yet. They're still children, they're still sleepers, and that's okay. And just being understanding that this isn't their path right now. This is your new path. So having consideration and compassion for the fact that they're not comfortable with it is actually part of your own ascension process. So when we do come out of that psychic closet, we have to have a lot of, sorry, sometimes noises make themselves in my space. We do have to have that compassion not only for them, but for ourselves too. And remember that you need to be strong in the process. So, yes, Vanessa.
I don't know if you know an answer to this, like if your guides have told you or anything, but why does it seem some families have psychic abilities as like a hereditary thing?
So have you ever noticed that some families have artistic abilities as a hereditary thing, or musically inclined? Or some people are just gardeners and their whole family are gardeners and they just seem to be naturally inclined towards those things. Or you'll have a family of really incredibly strong math skills, right? My family has a lot of lawyers and engineers and architects and computer engineers. And I mean, I have a very, very geeky family. Okay. So what did I go into? I went into accounting because that also runs in my family. We're all numbers geeks. Why? Because that's how our brain is built. So we are hereditarily born into certain natural or more natural inclinations or skills, because if our mom was good at math and our dad was good at math, there's a good chance we're going to be good at math. If mom was really psychic and dad was really psychic, you're more inclined to be psychic. In fact, some like we have ability on both sides of my family, which is why I called myself, I said I got sandwiched genetically. So it does run in families because of genetics, and because we do have a physical aspect to the brain that does help us with this. But just like with any muscle, you can have bodybuilders on both sides of your family, and if you don't work out, same thing with that muscle. You could have an artistically inclined mom and an artistically inclined dad, but if you don't like to do art, so it's more of recognizing the skills that we already naturally have and exercising that muscle so that we can grow it. But sometimes our parents won't say anything about the fact that they have natural inclinations towards seeing dead people or predicting things. And we don't know that until we actually come out of our closet, because they didn't come out of their psychic closet. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
My mom didn't mention anything till she was probably about a year into her cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
And she heard me talking with somebody from our church that was a mutual friend. And that's when she started saying stuff. And I was like, wait, what? I could have been talking to someone this whole time.
I know my dad didn't tell me until we were standing on my patio one year. He had come up. My back had gone out and I was like learning basically to kind of walk again. And we were out on my porch and talking about this stuff, because at that point I was actively involved in it. I had my own business and things like that. And he starts telling me, oh yeah, I can. And he starts listing off the things that he can do. And I'm like, what? I'm like, you're just telling me this now? And he's like, well, never felt the need to before. He's a pretty laid back guy. So it's just kind of funny. Sometimes some people won't even know that their family, like I said, is inclined towards these things. And then they don't know why they feel like they're crazy, or they feel like they're schizophrenic, or they feel like they're bipolar. And I deal with this all the time because they literally don't understand, because there's zero background knowledge of the abilities that do run in their family. So it's a pretty fascinating topic. I could go on that one for a while, but
Oh, yeah. Is there a way to tell if your child has one if they haven't talked to you about it, or if they're really young, like to notice things in them?
I asked EJ, he's 9 years old, and I didn't bring things up. I let him naturally grow and evolve. I mean, he does see the stuff that I do, and obviously we have like 5,000 rocks in my house. So, and he grew up in my office, so he knows mommy does this see dead people thing. However, he's as normal as it gets with basketball and sports and kids and friends. And so that's what I wanted for him, because I wanted to see if he naturally developed into this. And then I actually sat him down a few weeks ago and I asked him, I said, hey, do you ever have anything weird happen to you? Anything unusual? And he goes, and I haven't shared this with many people, but when I was a kid, I used to see floating, we would compare it to neon because that's what we had. They don't really have that now. It's LED, everything. But I would see floating neon shapes in my room or around my doorknob a lot of the times. And I was like, what is this? And he told me the other day that when I asked him if anything weird happened, he says, yeah, he's like, sometimes I see these floating, glowing shapes in my room when I'm laying in bed. And I'm like, oh. And then he said he won't go downstairs because he doesn't like it when the people talk to him. Like at night, he won't go downstairs by himself, even now. And he's a brave kid, but he won't do that. So I'm like, all right, so you like me, kiddo, But my other ones, I mean, Noah used to talk to spirits when he was younger, and he's a computer engineer. He blocked that out as hardcore on the left brain as you can. And then Justin used to say that sparkles would come off of his hands, and so natural healer. But yeah, he's gone back and forth on whether or not he thinks that that's an interesting thing, and now he's just like, eh. But he's in his early 20s. We'll see what happens. But yeah, so I mean, it is, it's with children, I like to see them develop naturally. If they start showing signs, start saying things, or if you can ask them some gentle questions, because you don't want to freak the kids out. At least that's my opinion. So I would ask them gently.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, when I was younger, I saw stuff. You described neon floaty lights. I used to see bright, shiny balls of light, and they'd move around.
We see more when we're children, because when we're open.
But I daydreamed a lot as a kid and was not always present when people tried talking to me, because I was never actually here. I was always somewhere else. And
they
so
call
like,
that ADHD now. So one of the things that I have noticed is that there are a lot of misdiagnosed children in our world right now, because everybody wants to slap a label on you, And so I have actually started working with more children, and not littles, because they're too young, they're still developing, but unless they're excessively gifted, that's a different situation. But that's, I'll evaluate the kids first. And if I feel that they are actually gifted and there isn't like a mental disorder that's possibly on board, then I'll work with them, because somebody has to help them. I stumbled, and a lot of children stumble. And back then you just were weird. Now you're labeled. So, and kids can get very emotionally, I mean, especially when they're going through that emergent teenage years, they can get very emotionally distraught, and it can be dangerous if they really don't know what they're doing, So I implore parents that think that their kids are gifted to seek out somebody that can help them with understanding if that's a disability, if it's a disorder, if it's or if it's just psychic abilities, because psychic abilities can be trained. So, any other questions?
I was going to ask, what about like coming through like your abilities type thing, coming from past lives? Is that something like
carryover?
Yeah, could you have been a shaman or a medicine person in a last life, and that's why you're kind of gifted instead of it coming through your family?
The funny thing is we tend to stick with our family lines, which is, every once in a while somebody jumps lines, but most of the time we stick with our family lines because we all evolve. But that being said, you may have been a shaman in a past life, but normally when we cross over, we close that door.
Right.
We take the lessons from that lifetime, and then we move into a new lifetime where we learn different lessons. Your spirit may be more drawn to something or more naturally inclined towards it because it did experience that past life. Okay. But we have to remember this is the lifetime that we're in. So do you want to, is there any harm in adventuring through the different types of, spirituality that are out there, no harm, no foul. Knowledge is power, right?
Mhm.
And so, but there are occasions where I've seen that people's door haven't been closed the door didn't get closed all the way. And so there's what we call carryover, at least that's what I call it, is carryover. And so there will be more natural inclinations to do something because
Yeah.
your spirit remembers more than it should.
You told me
Um,
that's probably what happened to me with my near-death experience, that the door didn't shut all the way.
Didn't
So
shut. Near-death experiences are a little bit of a different situation too, because with a near-death experience, we crack that door open.
Mhm.
Why? Because we probably were supposed to during this lifetime, you know? So with a near-death experience, obviously there's a major shift that needs to be made in our life right now to be able to create that opening, to be able to have a stronger connection, come back here and do something with it, serve with it, help people, and ascend ourselves, create more ascension. So with the past life thing though, like I said, your spirit may remember that. So, I mean, I know that sometimes if I'm too tired or something, I've noticed I tend to get a Southern accent. So my theory is that there's some remnants of something there.
Mhm.
Um,
I do the English accent, so
do
yeah.
you? Yeah, isn't that so funny?
Yeah.
My kids will be like, "Why are you talking like that?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just tired."
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Next question. Anybody? Okay. So, well, what I would do is if you guys have more questions, just, think of anything that you have that you can write down, and that way you can kind of keep note of it. And that way you can, shoot me a Facebook message or an email or something along those lines, and I'll see what I can do. The Facebook group is great because if you post a question on there, a lot of times you're not the only one thinking it. A lot of times, a lot of people, or you ask a question and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, I want to know about that too." So that would be a great place to post any additional questions that you have. But otherwise, yeah, if you guys don't have any more questions, maybe I'll let you loose early. So,
All right.
but thank you guys for coming today. And I'm glad that I got to at least, address some of your more immediate questions. So,
Yeah. Thank
all
you.
right. You're
Bye.
welcome. Bye, guys.
Bye.